When the day dawned which had been fixed for the discussion with Simon, Peter, rising at the first cock crowing, aroused us also. For we were sleeping in the same apartment, 13 of us in all, of whom, next to Peter, Zacchaeus was first, then Sophonius, Joseph and Machaeus, Eliesdras, Phineas, Lazarus, and Eliseus. After these I, Clement, and Nicodemus. Then Niceta and Aquila, who had formerly been disciples of Simon and were converted to the faith of Christ under the teaching of Zacchaeus. Of the women there was no one present. As the evening light was still lasting, we all sat down, and Peter, seeing that we were awake and that we were giving attention to him, having saluted us, immediately began to speak as follows.
I confess, brethren, that I wonder at the power of human nature, which I see to be fit and suited to every call upon it. This, however, it occurs to me to say of what I have found by experience, that when the middle of the night is past, I awake of my own accord, and sleep does not come to me again. This happens to me for this reason, that I have formed the habit of recalling to memory the words of my Lord, which I heard from himself, and for the longing I have towards them, I constrain my mind and my thoughts to be roused, that, awaking to them, and recalling and arranging them one by one, I may retain them in my memory. From this, therefore, while I desire to cherish the sayings of the Lord with all delight in my heart, the habit of waking has come upon me, even if there be nothing that I wish to think of. Thus, in some unaccountable way, when any custom is established, the old custom is changed, provided indeed you do not force it above measure, but as far as the measure of nature admits. For it is not possible to be altogether without sleep. Otherwise, night would not have been made for rest.
Then I, when I heard this, said, You have very well said, O Peter, for one custom is superseded by another. For when I was at sea, I was at first distressed, and all my system was disordered, so that I felt as if I had been beaten and could not bear the tossing and tumult of the sea. But after a few days, when I had got accustomed to it, I began to bear it tolerably, so that I was glad to take food immediately in the morning along with the sailors, whereas before it was not my custom to eat anything before the 7th hour. Now therefore, simply from the custom which I then acquired, hunger reminds me about that time at which I used to eat with the sailors, which, however, I hope to get rid of, when once another custom shall have been formed. I believe, therefore, that you also have acquired the habit of wakefulness, as you state, and you have wished at a fitting time to explain this to us, that we also may not grudge to throw off and dispense with some portion of our sleep, that we may be able to take in the precepts of the living doctrine. For when the food is digested, and the mind is under the influence of the silence of night, those things which are seasonably taught abide in it. Then Peter, being pleased to hear that I understood the purport of his preface, that he had delivered it for our advantage, and commending me, doubtless for the purpose of encouraging and stimulating me, began to deliver the following discourse.
It seems to me to be seasonable and necessary to have some discussion relating to those things that are near at hand, that is, concerning Simon. For I should wish to know of what character and of what conduct he is. Wherefore, if any one of you has any knowledge of him, let him not fail to inform me, for it is of consequence to know these things beforehand. For if we have it in charge, that when we enter into a city, we should first learn who in it is worthy, that we may eat with him. How much more is it proper for us to ascertain who or what sort of man he is to whom the words of immortality are to be committed? For we ought to be careful, yea, extremely careful, that we cast not our pearls before swine. But for other reasons also, it is of importance that I should have some knowledge of this man. For if I know that in those things concerning which it cannot be doubted that they are good, he is faultless and irreproachable. That is to say, if he is sober, merciful, upright, gentle, and humane, which no one doubts to be good qualities, then it will seem to be fitting that upon him who possesses these good virtues, that which is lacking of faith and knowledge should be conferred, and so his life, which is in other respects worthy of approbation, should be amended in those points in which it shall appear to be imperfect. But if he remains wrapped up and polluted in those sins, which are manifestly such, it does not become me to speak to him at all of the more secret and sacred things of divine knowledge, but rather to protest and confront him, that he cease from sin and cleanse his actions from vice. But if he insinuate himself and lead us on to speak what he, while he acts improperly, ought not to hear, it will be our part to parry him cautiously. For not to answer him at all does not seem proper, for the sake of the hearers, lest haply they may think that we decline the contest through want of ability to answer him, and so their faith may be injured through their misunderstanding of our purpose.
When Peter had thus spoken to us, Nisita asks permission to say something to him. And Peter having granted permission, he says,
"With your pardon, I beseech you, my Lord Peter, to hear me, who am very anxious for you, and who am afraid lest in the contest which you have in hand with Simon, you should seem to be outmatched. For it very frequently happens that he who defends the truth does not gain the victory, since the hearers are either prejudiced or have no great interest in the better cause. But over and above all this, Simon himself is a most vehement orator, trained in the dialectic art and in the meshes of syllogisms. And what is worse than all, he is greatly skilled in the magic art, and therefore I fear lest haply being so strongly fortified on every side, he shall be thought to be defending the truth, while he is alleging falsehoods in the presence of those who do not know him. For neither should we ourselves have been able to escape from him, and to be converted to the Lord, had it not been that, while we were his assistants, and the sharers of his errors, we had ascertained that he was a deceiver and a magician."
When Niseta had thus spoken, Aquila also, asking that he might be permitted to speak, proceeded in manner following.
"Receive, I entreat you, most excellent Peter, the assurance of my love towards you, for indeed I also am extremely anxious on your account. And do not blame us in this, for indeed to be concerned for anyone comes of affection, whereas to be indifferent is no less than hatred. But I call God to witness that I feel for you, not as knowing you to be weaker in debate. For indeed, I was never present at any dispute in which you were engaged. But because I well know the impieties of this man, I think of your reputation, and at the same time the souls of the hearers, and above all, the interests of the truth itself. For this magician is vehement towards all things that he wishes, and wicked above measure. For in all things we know him well, since from boyhood we have been assistants and ministers of his wickedness, and had not the love of God rescued us from him, we should even now be engaged in the same evil deeds with him. But a certain inborn love towards God rendered his wickedness hateful to us, and the worship of God attractive to us. Whence I think also that it was the work of divine providence, that we, being first made his associates, should take knowledge in what manner or by what art he effects the prodigies which he seems to work. For who is there that would not be astonished at the wonderful things which he does? Who would not think that he was a God come down from heaven for the salvation of men? For myself, I confess, if I had not known him intimately and had taken part in his doings, I would easily have been carried away with him. Whence it was no great thing for us to be separated from his society, knowing, as we did, that he depends upon magic arts and wicked devices. But if you also yourself wish to know all about him, who, what, and whence he is, and how he contrives what he does, then listen. This Simon's father was Antonius, and his mother, Rachel. By nation he is a Samaritan from a village of the Getones. By profession, a magician yet exceedingly well trained in the Greek literature, desirous of glory and boasting above all the human race, so that he wishes himself to be believed to be an exalted power, which is above God the Creator, and to be thought to be the Christ, and to be called the Standing One. And he uses this name as implying that he can never be dissolved, asserting that his flesh is so compacted by the power of his divinity that it can endure to eternity. Hence, therefore, he is called the Standing One, as though he cannot fall by any corruption. For after that, John the Baptist was killed, as you yourself also know, when Dositheus had broached his heresy, with 30 other chief disciples, and one woman, who was called Luna, whence also these 30 appear to have been appointed, with reference to the number of the days, according to the course of the moon. This Simon, ambitious of evil glory, as we have said, goes to Dositheus, and pretending friendship, entreats him, that if any one of those 30 should die, he should straightway substitute him in room of the dead, for it was contrary to their rule either to exceed the fixed number, or to admit anyone who was unknown, or not yet proved. Whence also the rest, desiring to become worthy of the place and number, are eager in every way to please, according to the institutions of their sect, each one of those who aspire after admittance into the number, hoping that he may be deemed worthy to be put into the place of the deceased when, as we have said, anyone dies. Therefore Dositheus, being greatly urged by this man, introduced Simon when a vacancy occurred among the number. But not long after he fell in love with that woman whom they call Luna, and he confided all things to us as his friends, how he was a magician, and how he loved Luna, and how, being desirous of glory, he was unwilling to enjoy her ingloriously, but that he was waiting patiently till he could enjoy her honorably. Yet so if we also would conspire with him towards the accomplishment of his desires. And he promised that, as a reward of this service, he would cause us to be invested with the highest honors, and we should be believed by men to be gods. Only, however, on condition, says he, that you confer the chief place upon me, Simon, who by magic art am able to show many signs and prodigies, by means of which either my glory or our sect may be established. For I am able to render myself invisible to those who wish to lay hold of me, and again to be visible when I am willing to be seen. If I wish to flee, I can dig through the mountains, and pass through rocks as if they were clay. If I should throw myself headlong from a lofty mountain, I should be borne unhurt to the earth, as if I were held up. When bound, I can loose myself, and bind those who had bound me. Being shut up in prison, I can make the barriers open of their own accord. I can render statues animated, so that those who see suppose that they are men. I can make new trees suddenly spring up, and produce sprouts at once. I can throw myself into the fire and not be burnt. I can change my countenance, so that I cannot be recognized, but I can show people that I have two faces. I shall change myself into a sheep or a goat. I shall make a beard to grow upon little boys. I shall ascend by flight into the air. I shall exhibit abundance of gold, and shall make and unmake kings. I shall be worshipped as God. I shall have divine honors publicly assigned to me, so that an image of me shall be set up, and I shall be worshipped and adored as God. And what need of more words? Whatever I wish, that I shall be able to do. For already I have achieved many things by way of experiment. In short, says he, once when my mother Rachel ordered me to go to the field to reap, and I saw a sickle lying, I ordered it to go and reap, and it reaped 10 times more than the others. Lately, I produced many new sprouts from the earth, and made them bear leaves, and produce fruit in a moment, and the nearest mountain I successfully bored through. But when he spoke thus of the production of sprouts and the perforation of the mountain, I was confounded on this account, because he wished to deceive even us, in whom he seemed to place confidence. For we knew that those things had been from the days of our fathers, which he represented as having been done by himself lately. We then, although we heard these atrocities from him, and worse than these, yet we followed up his crimes, and suffered others to be deceived by him, telling also many lies on his behalf, and this before he did any of the things which he had promised, so that while as yet he had done nothing, he was by some thought to be God. Meantime, at the outset, as soon as he was reckoned among the 30 disciples of Dositheus, he began to depreciate Dositheus himself, saying that he did not teach purely or perfectly, and that this was the result not of ill intention, but of ignorance. But Dositheus, when he perceived that Simon was depreciating him, fearing lest his reputation among men might be obscured, for he himself was supposed to be the standing one, moved with rage when they met as usual at the school, seized a rod and began to beat Simon. But suddenly the rod seemed to pass through his body, as if it had been smoke, on which Dositheus, being astonished, says to him, "Tell me if you are the standing one, that I may adore you." And when Simon answered that he was, then Dositheus, perceiving that he himself was not the standing one, fell down and worshipped him, and gave up his own place as chief to Simon, ordering all the rank of 30 men to obey him, himself taking the inferior place which Simon formerly occupied. Not long after this, he died. Therefore, after the death of Dositheus, Simon took Luna to himself, and with her he still goes about, as you see, deceiving multitudes, and asserting that he himself is a certain power which is above God the Creator, while Luna, who is with him, has been brought down from the higher heavens, and that she is wisdom, the mother of all things, for whom, says he, the Greeks and barbarians contending were able in some measure to see an image of her, but of herself as she is, as the dweller with the first and only God, they were wholly ignorant. Propounding these and other things of the same sort, he has deceived many. But I ought also to state this, which I remember that I myself saw. Once, when this Luna of his was in a certain tower, a great multitude had assembled to see her, and were standing around the tower on all sides. But she was seen by all the people to lean forward, and to look out through all the windows of that tower. Many other wonderful things he did and does, so that men, being astonished at them, think that he himself is the great God. Now, when Nisita and I once asked him to explain to us how these things could be affected by magic art, and what was the nature of that thing, Simon began thus to explain it to us as his associates. "I have," said he, "made the soul of a boy, unsullied and violently slain, and invoked by unutterable adjurations, to assist me, and by it all is done that I command." "But," said I, "is it possible for a soul to do these things?" He answered, "I would have you know this, that the soul of man holds the next place after God, when once it is set free from the darkness of his body, and immediately it acquires prescience, wherefore it is invoked for necromancy." Then I answered, "Why then do not the souls of persons who are slain take vengeance on their slayers? Do you not remember," said he, "that I told you that when it goes out of the body it acquires knowledge of the future?" "I remember," said I. "Well then," said he, "as soon as it goes out of the body, it immediately knows that there is a judgment to come, and that everyone shall suffer punishment for those evils that he has done. And therefore they are unwilling to take vengeance on their slayers, because they themselves are enduring torments for their own evil deeds, which they had done here, and they know that severe punishments await them in the judgment. Moreover, they are not permitted by the angels who preside over them to go out or to do anything." "Then," I replied, "if the angels do not permit them to come hither or to do what they please, how can the souls obey the magician who invokes them?" "It is not," said he, "that they grant indulgence to the souls that are willing to come. But when the presiding angels are adjured by one greater than themselves, they have the excuse of our violence who adjure them, to permit the souls which we invoke to go out. For they do not sin who suffer violence, but we who impose necessity upon them." Thereupon Nisita, not able longer to refrain, hastily answered, as indeed I also was about to do, only I wished first to get information from him on several points. But as I said, Nisita, anticipating me, said, "And do you not fear the day of judgment, who do violence to angels, and invoke souls, and deceive men, and bargain for divine honor to yourself from men? And how do you persuade us that there shall be no judgment, as some of the Jews confess, and that souls are not immortal, as many suppose, though you see them with your very eyes, and receive from them assurance of the divine judgment. At those sayings of his, Simon grew pale, but after a little, recollecting himself, he thus answered, "Do not think that I am a man of your race. I am neither magician, nor lover of Luna, nor son of Antonius. For before my mother Rachel and he came together, she, still a virgin, conceived me, while it was in my power to be either small or great, and to appear as a man among men. Therefore I have chosen you first as my friends, for the purpose of trying you, that I may place you first in my heavenly and unspeakable places, when I shall have proved you. Therefore I have pretended to be a man, that I might more clearly ascertain if you cherish entire affection towards me." But when I heard that, judging him indeed to be a wretch, yet wondering at his impudence, and blushing for him, and at the same time fearing lest he should attempt some evil against us, I beckoned to Niceta to feign for a little along with me, and said to him, "Be not angry with us, corruptible men, O you incorruptible God, but rather accept our affection and our mind willing to know who God is. For we did not till now know who you are, nor did we perceive that you are he whom we were seeking." As we spoke these and such like words with looks suited to the occasion, this most vain fellow believed that we were deceived, and being thereby the more elated, he added also this, "I shall now be propitious to you, for the affection which you bear towards me as God, for you loved me while you did not know me, and were seeking me in ignorance. But I would not have you doubt that this is truly to be God, when one is able to become small or great as he pleases. For I am able to appear to man in whatever manner I please. Now then, I shall begin to unfold to you what is true. Once on a time, I, by my power, turning air into water, and water again into blood, and solidifying it into flesh, formed a new human creature, a boy, and produced a much nobler work than God the Creator. For he created a man from the earth, but I from air, a far more difficult matter. And again, I unmade him and restored him to air, but not until I had placed his picture, an image, in my bedchamber, as a proof and memorial of my work. Then we understood that he spoke concerning that boy, whose soul, after he had been slain by violence, he made use of for those services which he required.
But Peter, hearing these things, said with tears,
"Greatly do I wonder at the infinite patience of God, and on the other hand, at the audacity of human rashness in some. For what further reason can be found to persuade Simon that God judges the unrighteous, since he persuades himself that he employs the obedience of souls for the service of his crimes? But in truth, he is deluded by demons. Yet, although he is sure by these very things that souls are immortal, and are judged for the deeds which they have done, and although he thinks that he really sees those things which we believe by faith, though, as I said, he is deluded by demons, yet he thinks that he sees the very substance of the soul. How shall such a man, I say, be brought to confess either that he acts wickedly while he occupies such an evil position, or that he is to be judged for those things which he has done, who, knowing the judgment of God, despises it and shows himself an enemy to God, and dares commit such horrid things? Wherefore it is certain, my brethren, that some oppose the truth and religion of God, not because it appears to them that reason can by no means stand with faith, but because they are either involved in excess of wickedness, or prevented by their own evils, or elated by the swelling of their heart, so that they do not even believe those things which they think that they see with their own eyes. But inasmuch as inborn affection towards God, the Creator seemed to suffice for salvation to those who loved him, the enemy studies to pervert this affection in men, and to render them hostile and ungrateful to their Creator. For I call heaven and earth to witness that if God permitted the enemy to rage as much as he desires, all men should have perished long ere now. But for his mercy's sake, God does not allow him. But if men would turn their affection towards God, all would doubtless be saved, even if, for some faults, they might seem to be corrected for righteousness. But now the most of men have been made enemies of God, whose hearts the wicked one has entered, and has turned aside towards himself the affection which God the Creator had implanted in them, that they might have it towards him. But of the rest, who seemed for a time to be watchful, the enemy, appearing in a fantasy of glory and splendor, and promising them certain great and mighty things, has caused their mind and heart to wander away from God. Yet it is for some just reason that he is permitted to accomplish these things.
To this Aquila answered,
How then are men in fault, if the wicked one, transforming himself into the brightness of light, promises to men greater things than the Creator himself does?
Then Peter answered,
I think that nothing is more unjust than this. And now listen while I tell you how unjust it is. If your son, whom you have trained and nourished with all care, and brought to man's estate, should be ungrateful to you, and should leave you and go to another, whom perhaps he may have seen to be richer, and should show to him the honor which he owed to you, and through hope of greater profit should deny his birth and refuse you your paternal rights, would this seem to you right or wicked?
It is manifest to all that it would be wicked.
If you say that this would be wicked among men, how much more so is it in the case of God, who, above all men, is worthy of honor from men, whose benefits we not only enjoy, but by whose means and power it is that we began to be when we were not, and whom, if we please, we shall obtain from him to be forever in blessedness, in order, therefore, that the unfaithful may be distinguished from the faithful, and the pious from the impious. It has been permitted to the wicked one to use those arts by which the affections of everyone towards the true Father may be proved. But if there were in truth some strange God, were it right to leave our own God, who created us, and who is our Father and our Maker, and to pass over to another?
God forbid.
How then shall we say that the wicked one is the cause of our sin, when this is done by permission of God, that those may be proved and condemned in the day of judgment, who, allured by greater promises, have abandoned their duty towards their true Father and Creator, while those who have kept the faith and the love of their own father, even with poverty, if so it has befallen, and with tribulation, may enjoy heavenly gifts and immortal dignities in his kingdom. But we shall expound these things more carefully at another time. Meantime, I desire to know what Simon did after this.
When he perceived that we had found him out, having spoken to one another concerning his crimes, we left him and came to Zacchaeus, telling him those same things which we have now told to you. But he, receiving us most kindly, and instructing us concerning the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, enrolled us in the number of the faithful.
When Niceta had done speaking, Zacchaeus, who had gone out a little before, entered, saying,
It is time, O Peter, that you proceed to the disputation, for a great crowd, collected in the court of the house, is awaiting you, in the midst of whom stands Simon, supported by many attendants.
Then Peter, when he heard this, ordering me to withdraw for the sake of prayer, for I had not yet been washed from the sins which I had committed in ignorance, said to the rest,
Brethren, let us pray that God, for his unspeakable mercy through his Christ, would help me going out on behalf of the salvation of men who have been created by him.
Having said this and having prayed, he went forth to the court of the house, in which a great multitude of people were assembled. And when he saw them all looking intently on him in profound silence, and Simon the magician standing in the midst of them like a standard-bearer, he began in manner following.
Peace be to all of you who are prepared to give your right hands to truth. For whosoever are obedient to it seem indeed themselves to confer some favor upon God, whereas they do themselves obtain from him the gift of his greatest bounty, walking in his paths of righteousness. Wherefore the first duty of all is to inquire into the righteousness of God and his kingdom. His righteousness, that we may be taught to act rightly, his kingdom, that we may know what is the reward appointed for labor and patience, in which kingdom there is indeed a bestowal of eternal good things upon the good, but upon those who have acted contrary to the will of God, a worthy infliction of penalties in proportion to the doings of everyone. It becomes you, therefore, while you are here, that is, while you are in the present life, to ascertain the will of God, while there is opportunity also of doing it. For if anyone, before he amends his doings, wishes to investigate concerning things which he cannot discover, such investigation will be foolish and ineffectual. For the time is short, and the judgment of God shall be occupied with deeds, not questions. Therefore, before all things, let us inquire into this, what or in what manner we must act, that we may merit to obtain eternal life. For if we occupy the short time of this life with vain and useless questions, we shall without doubt go into the presence of God, empty and void of good works, when, as I have said, our works shall be brought into judgment. For everything has its own time and place. This is the place, this the time of works, the world to come, that of recompenses, that we may not therefore be entangled by changing the order of places and times. Let us inquire in the first place, what is the righteousness of God, so that, like persons going to set out on a journey, we may be filled with good works, as with abundant provision, so that we may be able to come to the kingdom of God, as to a very great city. For to those who think aright, God is manifest, even by the operations of the world which he has made, using the evidence of his creation. And therefore, since there ought to be no doubt about God, we have now to inquire only about his righteousness and his kingdom.